Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's lesson. I'm just going to share this lesson with other people so more people can join us. I've got one person already. Good afternoon. That cannot possibly be. Okay, no, the thumbnail has to surely be different. The thumbnail can't possibly be that. Nadia, good afternoon. Okay, I'm going to share it anyway. Thumbnail should be different, though. I don't know why it wouldn't be. Thumbnail. There we go. Yes, thumbnail is different. Good. Okay, so that has now been shared. Well, I hope everyone is doing well. And you're all looking after yourselves. So in today's lesson, this is for upper intermediates, advanced, and what did I say? Upper intermediate, advanced, and IELTS. That was it. Upper intermediate, advanced, and IELTS. Now, with upper intermediates, we looked at some new language the other day. I think one of the things we'll look at here is probably, we're still going to take some language, I think, from Unit 2. So we'll look at something called worth a visit. In terms of the advanced, I'm also going to take some things from the advanced, which can potentially be useful to us. I think one of the things we can take from the advanced side of things is maybe some new words, new language as well. Something that can go in with what we're talking about here. So I think I've found something quite useful. We'll tie it in with a couple of things. And finally, when it comes to IELTS, what we'll do is we'll tie things in together. The other day I was talking about writing with the IELTS class. So I think what I'll do with this one is I'll tie this in actually with how to speak formally, your formal English side of things. So that's what we're going to try and do today. I should say at the start of the video, please make sure you look at our social media sites after this lesson today and over the weekend, because there should be some, there'll be news regarding the timetable for next week, as well as one or two other things that might be happening. There is the light is not good here, so I'm going to try and fix this light. Okay, I think that's a bit better. Okay, let's begin. So, with regards to the upper intermediate, we only have one person at the moment, which I believe is Nadia. Hopefully more people will join us. And good afternoon, Nadia. Here we're going to talk about, first of all, worth a visit. Now, when we are speaking about worth a visit, if you do have an upper intermediate book, you can find this on page 20. First of all, this term, it's worth it. It's worth it. If something is worth it, it means it's a good use of our time. It's time well spent. It's time well invested. Now, if we are talking about worth a visit, this is when we are talking about places that we need to go. Well, we don't need to go, but might be good to go. Places that might be good to go. I mean, if we think of places that would be worth a visit in different countries, some people might say amusement parks, which are theme parks, galleries, if you like art and stuff like that, historic buildings like Buckingham Palace or the Colosseum. I mean, I would always say the Colosseum is worth a visit. The Vatican City is worth a visit. If you go to Venice, obviously St. Mark's Square is worth a visit. Then you have various monuments as well. Um, then obviously museums, sports stadiums is worth a visit. I always would say it's worth going to live sporting events. Street markets. If you ever find yourself in Brighton, in in the south of England, it's got fantastic street markets. And finally, zoos. Now it depends what type of zoo. I think if you go to old-fashioned zoos, I don't think that is worth a visit. But if you go to modern-day zoos, which are more like natural reserves, where animals are still free, then that might be worth a visit. We've now got two people. Hello. Um, Now, here in this section, we can have a little conversation about talking about the future. And we can link this to talking about what we might want to do in the future, things that we think in the future, things that we think in the future might be worth doing. And here there's a little bit of grammar. So at the bottom of page 20, I'll just explain to you what it says here. There is no future tense in English. This is true. There is no future tense in English. There is, on the other hand, a future modal, such as will. Instead, there are different ways of talking about the future, such as going to plus infinitive, which is something you have learned. I think you will have learned that maybe even in pre-intermediate. Will plus the infinitive, which is without to, like I will shop, I will watch the television later. And the present simple and the present continuous in some sort of way. So how can we, on this note, let's actually start off by talking about the future and things that are worth a visit. Now, from here, I am going to leave the book a little bit. I'm going to just look at how we can talk about the future. The first thing we need to know is, like it said, there is no future tense. There are different types of language in the present, for example, to talk about the future, and there's the future modal verb. So, if you have a notebook, get ready to write some examples. So the first thing is this. Let's start off quite simply. Let's look at will. Now, will is a modal verb. Now, will can be used in the present and it can be used in the future, along with the negative won't. It can be in the future and it can be used in the present. Now, an example of using things in the present. For example, if the barman asks me, "What do you want to drink?" I can say, "I'll have a beer, please." Now, this is a future modal verb, but you will see that the time is present. And this is what we need to think about with the will. We're using the modal verb will, but the time of the sentence is actually in the present. So this takes on more of a present simple rather than a future simple because of the time. So we need to think of the time factor. Another example, you and your brother or your sister or your best friend, you are having an argument, or your mum or your dad, and they won't listen to you. So someone might ask you, "Why don't you talk to her?" And she might say, she or he won't listen to me. Again, if you say she won't listen to me, he won't listen to me, they won't listen to me, Yes, it seems like this would be a future simple, but it's not. You are using the future modality of won't in the, but it's actually present. You are talking about the present. So that's the first thing we need to remember. Those are examples of how you can use will to talk about the present. I'll have a beer, please. She won't talk to me. She won't listen to me. Again, it's context, and context makes the difference. So that is it in the present. But how do we talk about the future? Again, it's now talking about the time, such as I'll go home later, for example, or I won't stay, I won't, I won't go tomorrow. I won't go to school tomorrow. That's now talking about a future because the context of the sentence is now in the future. So just to recap, will and won't. Sorry, will and won't can be used in the present, can be used in the future. You just need to think about the timing. What time context are you giving your sentences? So that is how you can use it at a basic and simple way. Next, let's think about the present continuous. Okay, so if you're talking about the present continuous, it's quite simple. I am going to stay at home all day. Okay, this is a something that is happening in the present and it's going to continue into the future. Just as like saying, I'm going to Spain next month. Now, in this case, there's no reference to the present. This is now a future action that is a plan, because you will know that if you talk about I will go to Spain and I am going to Spain, there is a difference. I am going to Spain, that's a 100% plan because I'm using the present continuous with going. If I say, I will go to Spain next week, okay, you would assume that's going to happen. But the grammar is not as strong as using the present continuous. Now, how do we form, now what other modal verbs can we use to talk about the future? Because you will know that you can use will. Well, this is where we have to think of what we're trying to say. So, for example, if we say she might be 10 minutes late. You might read that and think, well, that's a present simple. But the modal verb here, might, along with 10 minutes late, is in fact talking about a possible future. So because you are changing your modal verb, it does not mean you are not talking about the future. It depends what happens with the rest of your sentence. So this is the time markers that make a really big difference. You could even change this to she should be 10 minutes late. She is likely to be 10 minutes late. She could be 10 minutes late. So you're using different modal verbs to talk about something in the future, and that is as simple. That's all it is, really. We just need to think of what the modal verb is, why we are choosing our modal verb. Will and won't is obviously stronger than might. What else? I think at a simple level, I think we can now move on to the next bit. So, what other forms of the future can we use? Well, we then have the future continuous structure. Now, I say future continuous because that's what we call it. It technically isn't a future tense because it doesn't exist. But how do we create it? It's quite simply, I will be going to, I'm going to Colombia. I will be going to Colombia. I will be going to Colombia in March. For example, you've got your will plus be plus verb ing. What does this mean? I'll be going to Colombia. Again, is this as strong as saying I am going to Colombia in March? Or no, it's not as strong as saying I'm going to Colombia in March. But if we use will, how strong is will? Well, will is about 90% certain that something's going to happen. But that's what we need to remember. The structure. I will be going to Colombia in March. Now, I won't be going to work on Monday. Now, again, I won't be going to work on Monday. Is this as strong as I'm not going to work on Monday? You could make the argument no from a grammatical reason, but it's still strong. It's still over 90% plus certain that you won't be going to work on Monday. But again, we can see the structure. You've got your modal verb, you've got be, and you've got the verb with ing. Now, when do you use the present? When do you use this future continuous? This is when you're talking about things that you think are, let's say, you're talking about things that you think are going to happen. But because you're talking about the future and there's a possibility that's not going to be correct, even if you are 95% sure, you, instead of using is or are, you'll be using will. So this is why we can say we are going. So, for example, we are going to be stuck inside for 2 months. Okay, now this is the present continuous, and this is 100%. If we say we won't be leaving home for 2 months, which is the same, we're just paraphrasing here. We won't be leaving home for 2 months. This is again very strong. And that's, again, we're talking about something that's in the future that we think is going to be continuing. And that's the important thing. It's going to continue. And this is usually because there is no, we might have an idea. We might have an idea for how long an action is going to go on for, but we could be wrong. Now, what if we wanted to change the won't? What if we wanted to use a different modal verb? Well, let's go with something like might. We might not be leaving our house for the next 2 months. Now we've chosen to use might. Now this is in the negative form, so it has to be might not. But the structure is still the same. The modal verb plus be plus the verb ing. And that is how you make continuous sentences talking about the future. Again, if you use won't or will, you're talking about something that's a lot more certain than if you're using might. The same goes with just about any other modal verb. But we need to think again about the time marker. In this case, the time marker. The time markers are stating a period of time, be it. So I'm going to write here time markers. You've got months, weeks, days, years, hours, even minutes, even seconds. Anything in the future. That's pretty much it. I'm going to give you guys the opportunity here at this point. I'm going to give you guys the opportunity. I would love to see what you guys end up writing, but I'd like you to um, create your own sentences. So I'm going to write one or two things here to help you out so you can see what I'm getting at. I'd like you to write a present continuous, and then, in fact, I'm going to write a present continuous. And I would like you guys to see if you can change the present continuous into a future continuous, just just playing around with the modal verb of will, for example. So if I write, we are, let's go with a negative. We aren't going to watch any football for the next 2 weeks. Let's say that is our sentence here. What I would like you to do, guys, is this. See if you can change that sentence using will or won't and might or might not. The meaning will be changed if you use will or might, but I like you to try and play around, and I would love to see what sort of ideas you guys come up with, and I will let you know if you're writing something that makes sense or writing something that doesn't make sense. So I'll give you a little bit of time while you try to come up with some ideas. While you are thinking of your sentences, I'm just going to continue talking about. I'm going to give you an example of. I'm going to give you some more examples. So while you are watching and you are trying to create your own sentences, see if you can come up with your own ideas, okay, of how to use this language. Now, for one example that we can relate to the present is let's say when we're talking about this continuous form. One thing, okay, we could say we are not seeing an improvement. We are not seeing an improvement in Italy regarding the coronavirus. We can then say, for instance, in the United Kingdom, we can say we won't be seeing any improvement in the next 2 months. That would be another example where we're talking about the present. If we're talking about another country, let's say South Korea, we might say we might not be seeing any improvement for the next 2 months. Now, this is stronger than saying we might not see. The reason being is that, again, when you are choosing to use a continuous form, you are saying that the action is going to continue into the future, or it's going to continue for a period of time. And that period of time, you might have an idea, but you might not always know. Okay, right, let's see. Has anyone written anything yet? No, no one's written anything yet. Well, I'll move on to the next thing. I'll move on to the next thing. So in case you guys do want to try and write anything in the meantime. I'm not going to introduce any more grammar for today because I would like to see you guys have a go at using the difference, trying to create the difference between present continuous and some form of a future continuous. Now, let's look at some new language. In the advanced lot, this week they'll be looking at something to do with relationships. And what we can do here is we'll just take this term relationships, we'll make it a little bit general. We're not going to be just talking about boyfriend, girlfriend, or a romantic relationship. Just general relationships we have with people, including friends. Some language might some language might be more appropriate for a romantic relationship, but much of this language is not. You can use it for everyday sort of type of relationships. So I'm not going to give you too many new words here, but some useful phrases, expressions really. The first is this. So for instance, I'm getting mixed messages. Okay, so here I'm using the present continuous with this term mixed messages. Mixed messages means simply that if you get mixed messages, it means you are confused because one moment someone is saying something, and the next moment that same person is saying something a little bit different. This is when you can't read what the person is trying to, where the person's, what the person is thinking, actually. This is quite a good way of thinking about it. You don't know what the person is thinking. You don't know if you and that person are thinking in the same way. And the person seems to be unclear with you over something. So this is what a mixed message is. Now, it can happen in a relationship when communication stops working well. It can also work in the work environment, especially when you hear different stories, maybe two people. If you're a manager, for example, or you're going to have to deal with people who have different ideas about a situation. Maybe it becomes slightly personal. You have to try and solve it, but you get mixed messages because there is an inconsistency with the story. It means the stories you hear are not the same. So when there's mixed messages, it means you are not being told the same thing. Nadia, thank you very much. What have you written? I will be starting an English course in May. Excellent. Perfect. That is the future continuous, and that's a positive one as well. So well done, Nadia. I think that's a very good sentence, and I hope you do start a new English course in May. Hopefully. Um, so that's mixed messages. Next one. Let's see what will happen. What will help him get back on the straight and narrow? Right. This is a really interesting one. We've got a sentence here. What will help him get back on the straight and narrow? Straight and narrow. What does this mean? The straight and narrow idiom simply means the right path or the right direction in life. Um, what's happening here? What have I done? It's correct, isn't it? Straight. I have no idea why it's suggesting that my spelling is wrong. It is right. No, straight and narrow. So what is the straight and narrow? It's the right direction. It's the right path. Simply put, if you have someone who is, let's say, maybe corrupt or dishonest, or maybe unfortunately they are a friend who has a drug problem, they are not on the straight and narrow. Straight and narrow is when someone is moving forward in their life in a healthy, positive way. They are not self-harming themselves mentally, physically, psychologically. If we were to relate this to stories, for example, that we might have seen, let's look at one very famous. Well, let's look at a story that everybody probably knows. I'm going to go with the comic book side of things because it's easy. Simply put, the Joker, for example, is not on the straight and narrow. Now, if you look at Christopher Nolan, the director of The Dark Knight, you will find that Christian Bale, who plays Batman, in Batman Begins, um, when uh, when what's his name, Mr. Wayne. So Mr. Wayne before he's Batman, Mr. Wayne before he's Batman is not on the straight and narrow. He is lost, and by becoming Batman, he ends up back on the straight and narrow, and that is a common theme in stories. Many stories, people, you've got the main character who is a bit lost in life. They're not on the straight and narrow. Then they find themselves in a life-changing situation, and they end up being the hero of the story. And when they become the hero of the story, they are then on the straight and narrow. And that is simply what it is. Now, let's look at the next one. We've got how did the ridiculous confrontation come about? So we've got, first of all, ridiculous. And then we've got confrontation. So, how did the ridiculous confrontation come about? Simply put, how did the stupid argument start? That is what it means. Ridiculous, something stupid. Confrontation, argument. How did the ridiculous confrontation come about? How did the stupid argument start? Well, where can we begin? Um, well, there's a lot of very silly, ridiculous confrontations about in the world. I mean, Trump is an obvious one, but let's go with a little bit of history. Now, if we look at the start, let's say a bit of a history lesson here. The First World War. How did the First World War start? Well, it was a ridiculous confrontation because you had the prince of, at the time, the Empire Austro-Hungary, who was assassinated by a Serbian. So what happened? Well, Serbia and Austro-Hungary ended up in a conflict, but their friends decided to get involved. Now, Russia was Serbia's friend, so Russia got involved. Germany was Austro-Hungary's ally, friend, so they got involved. So first you had Austro-Hungary and Serbia, then you had Russia and Germany. So you already had a number of countries starting to fight. But this is where it then gets very strange. Because Germany got involved, it left the west of their country exposed, and France ended up France and Germany end up in conflict. Then, well, how did the UK, how did Britain get involved? Well, it was because of Belgium. Because Belgium and France were allies, and Belgium and Britain were allies. So because Belgium ended up in the war, Britain ended up in the war. And that is how the First World War, sort of this ridiculous confrontation, grew. So that's a very simple, quick way of explaining a ridiculous confrontation. Let's look at the next one. Why do you think Toby was unwilling to back down? Now, this again is to do with arguments, and we can think of many, many examples of people unwilling to back down. First of all, this word, you've got willing, which means if you are willing, I am willing. To do something, you're saying, I am happy to do something. So, for instance, I am willing to cook dinner tonight. I am willing to go to the shops later after work. Now, I am not willing to do something simply means I am not happy to do something. So, Um, I am not willing to. I am not willing to go for a 20-mile run. I am not willing to um, play poker for money, for example. The next bit is back down. Um, if someone backs down, it means they cool it. They stop the confrontation. If someone does not back down, they are going to continue the confrontation. So you might tell someone, you need to back down, meaning you need to stop the argument. And then the person might say, I am not willing to back down, meaning I am not happy to stop the argument. Now, I'm sure you can think of examples for yourself where people were not willing to back down. You see this a lot in movies and TV programs. If we look at, let's see, what is a good TV series that a lot of people know? Maybe Sherlock. If you have seen Sherlock Holmes, for example, Sherlock Holmes is a character that never backs down. He never stops. He never stops investigating. He never stops arguing. He never stops because he never backs down. If you look at any of the superhero Marvel stories, such as the Avengers, you will see that the Avengers, like Captain America almost never backs down. He is always ready to fight and argue. And that continues. Can we think of characters that do back down? Um, I can't think of any characters off the top of my head that back down. I would have to think about that. But yes, most main sort of film characters, they don't back down, or at least not very easily. If you watch The Crown is an interesting one because sometimes you can see the Queen deciding not to back down, and then other times you see the Queen choosing to back down. And that's an interesting one. I do think The Crown is a good series. Let's look at the next one. Come as a shock. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Why has the incident come as a shock? Okay. If something comes as a shock, it means it's a surprise. You were not expecting it, and it's negative. So this is when an accident happens to someone you know, and it's a surprise. You weren't expecting it. So, for instance, if if you are if your friend is young and healthy, and they are in an accident and they are badly injured, um, and you weren't expecting them to be in any pain or anything like that, that will come to you as a shock. Um, if you expect something, then it will not come to you as a shock. But we use this for health reasons, really. We use it a lot for health and loss of income as well, actually. So, for instance, if you were planning on if you invested money on the stock market and you thought your money was safe and then you lose it, that might come as a shock. And also, this also happens a lot when we are talking about people who have passed away. So if someone dies suddenly and you were not expecting it, then it comes as a shock. It comes as a surprise. You were not expecting it. Um, Toby confided to his coach. What did Toby confide to his coach? Oh, that's a good one. I'm only going to do one more though. Why did the doctors say the man was in remarkably good health? Who came to his aid? Why did they split up when it came down to it? Where was a scene and where was the scene and what do you think caused it? Okay, let's go with why did they split up when it came down to it? We'll look at that term actually when it came down to it. So why did they split up when it came down to it? This term, when it came down to it, this simply means what was the main cause or reason? That's what you're asking. When it came down to it, or when it comes down to it, if you want to use it in the present. So you can use it at the start of your sentence as well. So when it comes down to it, why are we in this situation today? When it comes down to it, why did Ross and Rachel break up? Actually, I'll use them as a good example. Ross and Rachel from Friends, with Ross famously saying, "We were on a break." When it came, well, this is in the past. So when it came down to it, Ross and Rachel broke up in Friends because Ross, I suppose, is quite a controlling character, and wanted to make a lot of decisions about him and Rachel without Rachel having a say. So I think that was probably Rachel's reason when it came down to it. That's why Rachel chose to end the relationship. But for Ross, why did it end for Ross? I suppose when it came down to it, Ross probably felt unappreciated, probably felt that Rachel didn't appreciate him, what he was trying to do, and ended up doing, ended up throwing the relationship away because of it. So that would be my example. Friends actually is generally an all-round very, very, very good program to learn English or to use as an example, because they've got so many good everyday examples and they use plenty of phrases and idioms. So I think that's going to be it for the new language, because there's quite a lot of new language there. We've got uh, straight and narrow, ridiculous confrontation. We've got willing and unwilling to do something. We've got to back down or not to back down. Um, Comes as a shock, and finally when it comes down to it. So that's a good amount of new language there. Now let's move on a little bit from this, and this time we are going to now talk about how we can speak formally when talking about ideas and arguments. Now, in the other day in IELTS, we looked at how to improve how to improve formal writing. Um, the formal written side, especially a little bit to do with when we were talking about linking ideas together. So we looked at the introduction, conclusion, and we also looked at the main body. And one of the things to know is that when you're discussing in a main body of an essay, it's useful to know language like on one hand, on the other, furthermore, moreover. These are discourse markers and they are very good, and it's something you should definitely continue to learn. However, there is another option, and you can use this both speaking and writing. Stating your arguments in a form of a question. But I'm going to focus in on one type of question. Take on the form of a conditional, and instead of if, use should. So let's say, for example, if let's say we're talking about let's see, let's say we're talking about what's a really topical issue at the moment. Maybe I tell you what, mental health and social media. Let's say that's the topic, mental health and social media. You might write saying that if let's say you want to use a question. If social media does cause uh, anxiety, then is then how should we manage it? Let's say that's your question. So I'll just write it here for you. So let's say your question is in a conditional. If social media does cause anxiety, how should we manage it? Now you can change if for should. Should social media cause, now you'll notice if I'm using if should social media cause, I'm no longer using if social media does cause. I mean, technically, we don't need does even. If social media causes anxiety, we don't even need does in the original. We could change that. But let's say, should social media cause anxiety, how should we manage it? Now, what are we looking at here? When trying to argue or talk about different ideas in English, to help, I strongly recommend presenting the idea you want to discuss in the form of a question. If you create your question in the form of a conditional, it's very useful because it then helps you to automatically discuss the for and the gates, the different ideas with that conditional. You can replace if for should. But I don't think we need does. We don't need does with the should. No, we don't. We can't use should actually with, sorry, we can't use does with should. So that's an exception. If you use should, don't use does. So here you would be saying, let's say, the question, someone asks you, do you think social media is unhealthy? You can then paraphrase the question by saying, well, should social media cause anxiety? How should we manage it? Well, and you go on to give your answer. So this is a really useful tactic. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to write some more conditional questions. I'm going to give you the opportunity to try and rewrite the conditional question changing the if for should. Let's see what you come up with. Okay, so If actually, yeah, but I'm going to stick to questions actually at the moment. Now, I should add um, one or two things. If we use if it's a matter of if it's a matter of quality, let's say, I cannot say should is a matter of quality. No, should it be a matter of quality? So, one of the things I do want to point out here is that when you change if and should in a conditional, you need to rethink your verb to be. You're going to need to make it, you need the be in, not in terms of a verb to be, but just be. So should it be, so should it be a matter of quality? So instead of saying, so yes, you can say if it's a matter of quality, sorry, that should be a matter of quality. If it's a matter of quality, to rewrite it, it would have to be should it be a matter of quality. So we've got if things get worse, what are our options? If it's a matter of money, how much is how much is needed? Sorry, how much is needed? How much is needed to solve the problem? Um, yes, note there's a passive in there. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'll continue talking about giving you some more. I'll continue giving you some more examples, but see if any of you can try and come up with your own example. What you need to do is you need to use should. If you take something like one of the examples here, if things get worse, what are our options? Take that sentence and see if you can rewrite it with should. Rewrite it with should. So we've got if things get worse, what are our options? Try and rewrite that sentence with should and see what you come up with. Okay. Now, in the meantime, while you think, I'm going to um, I'm going to discuss something using this language. Um, I'm going to talk about health during the period of lockdown. So, should we find ourselves in our homes for a long time with the same people, how can we go about our day and still be healthy? So, um, to explore that, I would say we still need to find some way of doing exercise. I think that is really important. Definitely trying to find some way of doing exercise, even if it's something simple like push ups and sit ups. Trying to get some fresh air, even if it means sticking our head out the window or head out of the balcony. Um, I think during this period, we still need that fresh air. And then I think it's also the amount of food we eat and the quality of food we eat. So it could be very tempting to eat an awful lot, but that would be unhealthy. So I think during this period, I myself am trying to be careful of how much I eat. I don't eat too much. I know it's not going to be healthy. It's the same as drinking as well. I like my wine, I like my whiskey, but um, it would be unhealthy to drink it would be unhealthy to drink too much. And then it's a question of how do we entertain ourselves? Well, should we be here inside for a long time? Obviously, watching films and TV series can be enjoyable, but too much of the same thing is going to become boring. So for me, one of the important things is trying to find time to read. Um, I'm reading about 4 or 5 different books at the moment. I think also writing as well. Um, Trying to find time to write, even write down your thoughts and ideas. So I would suggest that. Okay, I'll give you the answers. So if things get worse, what are our options? This can, if you write it with should, can be written as should things get worse, what are our options? So that's number one. Number two, if it's a matter of money, how much is needed to solve the problem? The answer, if we were to write it with should, would be should it be a matter of money, how much is needed to solve the problem? And that's the answer. So if you want to leave your own examples in the comments section below, please do. I would like to thank all of you for joining today's lesson. It was quite heavy in some ways. We looked at the future ways of writing sentences to do with the future. We looked at some new complicated words, and we looked at some more grammar about presenting our arguments. So today was quite full on and quite heavy. As I said at the start of the video, please make sure you look at social media on AM social media platforms, because there will be things being posted over today or over the weekend, especially regarding what's happening as well, the times for next week with any YouTube videos as well. I'd like to thank you over the past 2 weeks for joining the lessons. I know it's unlikely that you'll be able to understand everything because it's difficult without a whiteboard. Nonetheless, I hope you guys are making notes and still trying to study in your spare time. If you ever want feedback, just write in the comment section below. I will have a look, and if I see a comment that is to do with your language, I will then get back to you. So thank you very much. I wish you all the best. Have a jolly good weekend, because today is Friday. And stay safe, stay healthy, and see you next week. Yeah, pretty much it. Bye for now, guys. Oh, like and share the video and subscribe and turn on the notification bell for whenever we're on, and share this with people that you think would find it helpful. Bye for now.